I specifically remember watching the news that morning. There were huge floods in the Midwest and another drug crackdown in a local city. The weather report was calling for afternoon thunderstorms. I got out of school at 2:10, and the first thing I noticed were the clouds. They weren't fluffy and white like that morning. They weren't gray like rain. They were brown. Muddy water brown. When I got home, my dad had the Weather Channel on, the bottom of the screen flashing things like severe thunderstorm warning. I wasn't particularly alarmed. I had been waiting for a good thunderstorm, and we could use some rain. As the hour went on, though, things got a bit more serious. The radar wasn't green for rain showers. It wasn't even red for thunderstorms anymore. It was pink. Pink right over our town. Pink meaning the worst kind of storm. The biggest, fiercest kind of storm. It happened around 6, and I remember because my mom had just gotten home. She had stopped at the grocery store to pick up some dinner, and my dad had been trying her cell phone for the past 45 minutes, trying to get a hold of her. He has a knack for overreacting to things, so naturally we had all made fun of him at the time, especially when he forced us all to go into the basement. "This is Wilbraham," I had said. "Nothing ever happens here." But as the power went out, we all gathered at the window, and we could hear it. It wasn't like I imagined from the movies. The train noise that everyone says. Listening to it from about a half a mile away, it was more like the ocean, magnified to 300 times its sound. We could hear hail hitting our house like acorns in the fall, but louder, more aggressive. And scariest of all, we could hear the trees, twisting, sickening snaps from every direction, deadening thuds. Then suddenly there was just rain. For a moment, everything faded out, and then we heard the sirens. We all just kind of looked at each other at that moment. My mom, my dad, my brother, and I. My dad was, per usual, pacing the floor, going back and forth between thinking that this was the coolest thing ever and being completely paranoid that our house was about to fall down. Personally, I was still in shock. We stayed in the basement for a few minutes, running around and looking out all the windows, throwing out thoughts about what had happened. With the power still out, our curiosity finally got the best of us, and we decided to venture out, the majority of the storm being over. We had reached about half-mile down Main Street when it finally hit us what had happened. The metal roof of Merrick's farm had been torn off, twisted like a car that was hit on the highway by an 18-wheeler. There was a pine tree that was completely uprooted and laying directly in front of us, that had taken an entire section of telephone poles and wires down with it. And the people. There were people everywhere. Girls walking around in one front yard, dressed to the nines for prom, looking at a car, presumably one of their own, that was almost completely covered by a fallen tree. Everyone had crawled out from where they had been hiding, and people were just wandering like we were. The whole scene was easily one of the most bizarre things I had ever seen. And the eeriest part of all, we could see everything around us. All the trees that had been there on the way to school lay decimated across the ground. Splintered and twisted limbs completely covering the road ahead of us. The green leafy branches lying soggy and defeated at the trunks of broken trees. Everything was brown and green with flashing red lights and darkening skies and bolts of lightning, with girls dressed for prom and sirens wailing and rain still falling. And in that moment, we all just looked at what was never supposed to happen to our tiny town. In this moment, the world I lived in and the world on the news, they were the same world. I had never equated the two. There was the world that I lived in, the world of Wilbraham, Massachusetts, the world of cows and farms and yellow school buses and rainbows. And then there was the world I saw in the news. The world of bank robberies and murders and floods and tornadoes. The two did not mix. But in the flashing blue lights, the explosions of lightning, I was suddenly in that world. We were the news that day.